Well, today we are cracking open really a cornerstone of American memoir, the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin.
That's right.
And we aren't here for the glossy national portrait, the face on the $100 bill.
No, not at all. We're going straight to the source material. We want to find the raw, sometimes, well, let's be honest, sometimes ruthless story of the man who basically invented himself.
Right, so our mission here is to strip away that marble pedestal, the legend of the kite and the key.
Exactly. We're looking at the runaway apprentice, the ambitious schemer, the guy who meticulously cataloged his own mistakes, almost like scientific findings.
He called them his errata.
His errata, yes. And he turned those failures into this incredibly detailed blueprint for success. It's fascinating because Franklin wrote this narrative initially, at least, for his son, and then later broadened it for his descendants and, crucially, for young readers.
So it wasn't just vanity then.
Not entirely. He specifically emphasized the human aspect, his rise from, quote, poverty and obscurity. The goal wasn't just biography. It's a surprisingly candid self-help manual.
A manual on how to get ahead.
Pretty much. How to acquire knowledge, wealth, influence. But with the understanding that even the wisest figures, like himself, are grappling with everyday passions and, shortcomings. It's refreshingly honest in places.
Okay, let's unpack this incredible journey then. We're starting our deep dive, not with the revered founding father, but with a rebellious kid navigating the chaos of a huge family in colonial Boston.
Yeah, the domestic environment Franklin grew up in was really formative. He was the youngest son and one of 17 children born to his father, Josiah Franklin.
17, just imagine that dinner table.
Right. He notes that at one point, 13 of his siblings were all sitting there eating together. I mean, the sheer logistics are mind-boggling.
And what's really interesting, as you mentioned, is that the focus wasn't on just feeding everyone.
Not at all. It was on intellectual debate. His father, Josiah, who Franklin describes as ingenious and strong, he deliberately made the dinner hour into a kind of mandatory intellectual training.
So instead of pass the potatoes, it was pass the philosophical argument.
Pretty much. Josiah would purposefully introduce some ingenious or useful topic for discourse, explicitly to improve his children's minds. Franklin actually records that little or no notice was ever taken of what related to the victuals on the table.
And that focus, that kind of early training, it had a huge lasting impact on Franklin's character, didn't it?
Absolutely. It created this lifelong indifference to dining. He basically says if you asked him a few hours after dinner what he ate, he scarce tell.
Which sounds like a small thing, but it probably saved him a lot of time and money later.
A tremendous asset. He never prioritized lavish meals or expensive wine. This meant when he was saving money or traveling, he was perfectly content with the cheapest, most basic food. It was a massive financial and practical convenience, really, born from that busy family table.
He also had another big influence in the family, right? His Uncle Benjamin.
Yes, Uncle Benjamin, whom he was named after. He was quite a character himself, ingenious, a poet, had political leanings.
And he had a specific skill.
He did. He was deeply pious, and he developed his own system of shorthand.
Shorthand? For what?
To transcribe sermons. He'd go listen to the best preachers and take down their sermons word for word, apparently amassing huge volumes of them.
And young Franklin learned this.
He learned the system from his uncle. Franklin admits later he didn't practice it enough to really keep it up, but that early exposure, it connected him to structured writing, to capturing complex ideas. It's another piece of that early intellectual environment.
Okay, so that leads us to an early example of his ambition, what he called his projecting public spirit, which unfortunately landed him in a bit of hot water.
Ah, yes. The famous, or maybe infamous, incident of the stolen stones.
This story feels really key, doesn't it? Sets up that core tension in Franklin.
It absolutely does. It establishes that central ethical dilemma of his whole life. Utility versus honesty. As a boy, he and his buddies lived near a salt marsh.
A mere quagmire, he calls it.
Right, where they used to fish. Franklin, being the natural leader even then, proposed they build a solid wharf so they could stand and fish properly.
A classic Franklin move. Identify a problem, propose a practical solution.
Exactly.
Right.
But the execution, well, that's where it gets tricky. He didn't waste any time finding material.
No, he spotted a convenient pile of stones nearby.
Very convenient. A large heap of heavy stones intended for a new house being built nearby. He mobilized the boys, and they worked incredibly hard, moving these stones like so many emmets, like ants.
Industrious little guys.
They finished the wharf that evening, totally pleased with themselves, feeling they'd done a great public service.
Until the next morning,
Until the next morning when the builders discovered their foundation stones were missing. Whoops.
So they got caught.
Oh, yeah. They were caught and corrected by their fathers, and Franklin, ever the rationalist, apparently pleaded the usefulness of the work. Look at this great wharf. Isn't this better?
But his father wasn't buying it.
Not at all. Josiah gave him the defining lesson, the one that echoes through the autobiography. Nothing was useful which was not honest.
Usefulness can't trump integrity. That must have been a tough pill to swallow for a kid so focused on efficiency.
A necessary corrective, definitely. An early hard knock that checked that projecting public spirit. But notice the pattern, right?
I get it.
The same impulse: identify a civic problem, the messy marsh, organize a solution, the wharf. That's exactly what he does later in Philadelphia, but this time, hopefully, with honesty included. That leadership drive was always there.
So he gets pulled from school young, around 10, works for his father, then gets apprenticed to his older brother James, who's a printer. And he channels that energy into intense self-education.
He really does. His reading list immediately shows this gravitation towards practical stuff, philosophical thought. He traded theology books, like Pilgrim's Progress, for things he found more useful.
Like Plutarch.
Devoured Plutarch's Lives, called that time spent to great advantage. And Daniel Defoe's essay on Project, he wasn't just reading for fun. He was reading strategically, building his worldview, his skill set for his future career.
But he didn't just read passively. He used these texts like a mental gym.
Right.
Especially for writing.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
His method for improving his prose, particularly by imitating essays from The Spectator, is incredibly detailed. It shows you just how methodical he was, even as a teenager.
How did it work exactly?
He'd read an essay, then jot down short hints of the sentiment in each sentence. Sometimes he'd even turn the prose into verse, which is wild.
Okay.
Then he'd put his notes away for days, deliberately letting himself forget the original phrasing.
Why the delay? What was the point of that?
That was the key. The delay forced true expansion. He'd then try to recreate the entire essay just from his memory of the structure and the core ideas. This forced him to find new words, new ways to express the concepts.
So he wasn't just mimicking sentences.
Exactly. It expanded his vocabulary, refined his style, made it his own language, not just a copy. He wanted mastery.
And he applied that same kind of rigor to how he argued, didn't he? He discovered the Socratic method.
Yes, he read philosophers like Locke, Xenophon's Memorabilia, and got introduced to Socrates. He was immediately charmed by it.
Why? What was so appealing?
Its power. It let him avoid direct contradiction, head-on arguments. Instead, he can play the humble inquirer and doubter.
Asking us in questions.
Disarming questions, yeah.
No.
Until he could entangle people in their own contradictions. He admits he loved that he could win arguments even when, maybe, his own position wasn't actually stronger. It felt like a secret weapon.
But he eventually realized that just winning arguments wasn't the real goal.
Precisely. Persuasion was the goal. And the trickery of the Socratic method, while powerful, could be socially damaging. People don't like being made to look foolish.
Right. That dogmatic approach, saying certainly or undoubtedly, it just puts people's backs up.
Absolutely. It provokes opposition, resentment. So, he made a conscious effort. He says it took some violence to natural inclination to adopt modest, non-positive phrasing, a lifelong habit.
Training himself to say things like, I conceive, or it appears to me.
Exactly. I should think it's so, or so. Phrases like that. It sounds almost like a strategic retreat from intellectual confidence, doesn't it?
But it was purely tactical for him.
Entirely tactical and incredibly effective. He credits this habit as being vital to his later success in public life. When he proposed something controversial in, say, a public council, the lack of positive assertion meant his opinions got a readier reception and less contradiction. He learned to disarm opponents before they even knew they were being persuaded. A masterclass in soft power.
And this need for self-control, this calculated humility, it really stemmed from the conflicts brewing back in Boston, didn't it? Especially with his brother.
Oh, definitely. He was constantly clashing with his printer brother, James. James grew jealous when young Ben started writing successful articles anonymously, the do-good papers.
People liked them, but James didn't know it was his little brother writing them initially.
Right. And when he found out, the resentment apparently grew. The whole situation became toxic. Plus, Ben's indiscreet disputations about religion weren't helping.
He was getting a reputation.
A bad one. He was being seen as an infidel or atheist, which was a huge deal in Puritan New England. He felt pointed at with horror. He realized, look, to save my reputation, my future, I've got to get out of here. And it had to be secret.
Why secretly? Couldn't he just leave?
His father, Josiah, had already lost two older sons who ran away to sea. He would almost certainly have tried to stop Ben from leaving openly.
So at 17, he plots his escape.
He does. His friend Collins helps arrange passage on a sloop heading to New York. Franklin sells some books for cash and slips aboard privately without his father's knowledge or consent, a true runaway.
And his arrival in Philadelphia. It's become legendary, hasn't it? Painted by Franklin himself as the absolute rock bottom.
It's a masterpiece of self-deprecation. He'd traveled almost 300 miles, partly by sea, partly walking across New Jersey. He arrives exhausted, filthy from the journey, wearing his rough working clothes because his better set was coming around by sea transport.
And his pockets are stuffed.
Stuffed out with shirts and stockings, he says, giving him this ridiculous, bulky look. He's starving, has barely any money, just a Dutch dollar and some copper coins.
So he goes looking for bread.
Walks up Market Street, finds a baker, asks for 3 pence worth of bread. The baker gives him 3 enormous, puffy rolls, apparently. They made bread differently there.
Way more than he expected.
And he has nowhere to put them because his pockets are full. So he walks down Market Street with 1 roll under each arm, eating the 3rd one.
Just this awkward, hungry kid.
And it's precisely at that moment, in that state of comical exhaustion and disarray, that he's seen by a young woman.
Miss Reed. Deborah Reed.
Yes, the woman he eventually marries. She was standing at her father's door. He writes that she saw me and thought I made, as I certainly did, a most awkward, ridiculous appearance.
It's such a deliberate scene, isn't it? Setting up the contrast.
Absolutely. He frames it perfectly to contrast with the wealth and fame he achieves later. It's the before picture in his manual of self-creation, how a man, starting from utter ridiculousness and poverty, can climb to the very top.
So Franklin lands in Philly looking, as he says, ridiculous, but his talent and diligence quickly get noticed. Unfortunately, they attract the wrong kind of attention first.
Yeah, the attention of the governor of the province, Sir William Keith. And this interaction becomes what Franklin calls his first great erratum, a major mistake.
It sounds devastating in the telling.
It really is. Governor Keith, the top official, suddenly starts showering this 17-year-old runaway printer with attention, flattery.
Things Franklin was totally unused to.
Completely. Condescension and politeness, he calls it. Keith takes him out drinking Madeira with another official, Colonel French, and starts making these huge promises. It must have felt like a dream come true for this ambitious kid.
What was the big promise? The scheme.
Keith proposed to set Franklin up in his own printing business, right there in Philadelphia. Promised him all the official government printing work for both Pennsylvania and Delaware. Big stuff.
Wow. But there was a catch.
The catch was, Keith insisted Franklin needed to go to London first to buy his own printing press and types, and Keith promised him the crucial funding, a guaranteed letter of credit.
And Franklin, naive and eager, completely bought it.
He totally did. He thought Keith was one of the best men in the world. He made plans, told his family back in Boston, who were likely relieved he wasn't just wandering, and set sail for London on a ship called the Annis.
Carrying letters from the governor.
Supposedly carrying the all-important letters, including the letter of credit. He had a brief worry when Keith's official dispatches didn't arrive before the ship sailed, but the captain reassured him they'd be in the mailbag. Franklin just trusted it would all work out. His inexperience was his downfall here.
But the reality hits him hard in London.
It's a brutal transatlantic shock, a real narrative gut punch in the autobiography. They arrive in London Christmas Eve, 1724. Franklin goes to the captain to sort through the mailbag and find the governor's letters for him. There are none addressed to him. He finds about 6 or 7 letters from Keith addressed to other people, hoping maybe the credit instructions are inside one of those. He takes the first one to a well-known stationer it's addressed to.
Okay.
The stationer opens it, reads the signature William Keith, and immediately explodes, calling Keith a complete rascal, and basically throws the letter back at Franklin.
Oh no, the moment the trap just snaps shut.
3,000 miles from home, basically penniless, no prospects. The horrifying truth dawns on him.
How did he confirm it?
He confided in a fellow passenger, a Quaker merchant named Mr. Denham, who had sailed with him. Denham delivered the final crushing blow. He knew Keith's reputation.
What did he say?
The Governor Keith was famous for being liberal of promises which he never meant to keep. He had no credit himself, couldn't possibly provide any to Franklin. He'd simply used the eager young man to get rid of him, or perhaps just enjoyed playing the patron without any cost.
Wow. Franklin calls this whole episode, plus some financial troubles that followed in London, the first great errata of my life.
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway for him?
It's a profound, harsh lesson in political cynicism, isn't it? It taught him that appearances, titles, flattery, they mean nothing. A person's actual reputation for integrity, their creditworthiness in the truest sense, that's the only real currency.
And his own naivete played a role.
He acknowledges that. His inexperience, combined with the knavery of others, led directly to this huge blunder. It definitely shaped his future caution. He became much warier of grand promises and smooth talkers after that.
So if the governor was a failure of distant authority, Franklin's next set of painful lessons came from people much closer to him, his talented friends.
Yes, he gives us two really potent, quite sad case studies. John Collins and James Ralph.
These were guys he was intellectually close to.
Very close initially. Collins was his childhood best friend back in Boston. Franklin calls him a wonderful genius for mathematical learning. They were always reading together, arguing, pushing each other intellectually.
But Collins didn't handle life outside Boston well.
No. After Franklin left, Collins apparently fell apart. Franklin mentioned specifically sodding with brandy, heavy drinking, and gambling.
And when Collins followed Franklin to New York and then Philadelphia,
Franklin found him profoundly changed, drunk almost every day. This addiction leads to this really dramatic and kind of brutal physical showdown on the Delaware River.
the boat incident.
Yeah, they were out rowing with some other young men, and Collins, probably drunk and definitely being difficult, refused to take his turn rowing.
And Franklin wasn't having it.
Franklin, whose mind was already, as he puts it, soured with his other conduct, the drinking, the gambling, probably borrowing money, refused to row Collins either. Things escalated. Collins, drunk and angry, threatened to throw Franklin overboard.
Big mistake. What did Franklin do?
His response is shocking in its decisiveness. He narrates it very coolly. He waited until Collins got close, then clapped my hand under his crutch and, rising, pitched him head foremost into the river.
Just threw him in.
Just tossed him overboard. He knew Collins could swim, so it wasn't deadly, but it was definitely aggressive. Franklin and the others then rowed away a bit.
Leaving him in the water.
Yeah, pausing only to ask if he'd agree to row now. They kept him there, getting tired and waterlogged until Collins finally had to give in, admit defeat. Franklin let him back in the boat, dripping wet, humbled, at least for the moment.
It sounds like a really severe kind of moral intervention, almost like a father disciplining a wayward son.
It does have that quality, but the tragedy deepens because Collins then drags Franklin down financially.
Ah, right. This is the second erratum connected to Collins.
Exactly. Collins needed money, partly to cover gambling debts, but specifically money he owed to a mutual friend named Vernon. Vernon had entrusted some money to Franklin's care, or perhaps for Franklin to manage.
And Franklin gave it to Collins.
Yes, desperately wanting to help his old friend, or maybe pressured, he gave Vernon's money to Collins, who promised faithfully he'd repay it once he got to Barbados, where he was heading.
Yeah, let me guess.
Collins vanished. Franklin never heard from him again, never got the money back. So he didn't just lose his friend to addiction, he also committed a serious breach of trust with Vernon's money.
Another hard lesson.
He admits it was a major mistake, proving his father right that he was too young to handle business of importance. The clear lesson: personal loyalty, however strong, shouldn't override financial integrity, especially with other people's money.
Okay, so friend number 2 who failed him, James Ralph, the aspiring poet he sailed to London with.
Ralph was another tricky one. Ingenious, genteel, and extremely eloquent, Franklin says. Very talented with words, but utterly lacking discipline and, frankly, honesty, and obsessed with becoming famous.
He pulled a stunt early on with a poem, didn't he?
Yeah, a classic Ralph move. He wrote a poem, but he was nervous about showing it, so he got Franklin to present it to their mutual friends as Franklin's work, just to get an unbiased opinion.
Sneaky? Did it work?
Too well. The friends apparently loved the poem, heaped praise on it, and this convinced Ralph he was destined for literary greatness. It fixed him, Franklin says, in his resolution of becoming a poet.
Until reality, or rather, Alexander Pope intervened.
Exactly. That resolution only died much later when the great satirist Alexander Pope publicly mocked Ralph by name in his famous poem The Dunciad, basically calling him a hack. Pope cured him of poetry, as Franklin Riley puts it.
But the real damage to Franklin happened in London, right? Ralph was trying to make it as an actor or writer.
Failing miserably at both and constantly borrowing money from Franklin, Franklin says Ralph owed him about £27 in the end.
Which was a huge amount back then, especially for Franklin, who was just getting by.
A fortune. Money Franklin desperately needed himself. And Ralph never repaid a penny. But then came the final insult, the real kicker.
What did you do?
Ralph got a job as a country schoolmaster miles away from London, but to hide his failure and maybe his debts, he took the job under a fake name.
Okay, what name?
Mr. Franklin.
No, he used Franklin's name.
Yes. And to top it all off, he had been living with a young woman, a milliner. He just abandoned her, left her essentially in Franklin's care, expecting Franklin to sort things out or support her.
Unbelievable. Franklin was left with a debt and this awkward responsibility for Ralph's discarded mistress.
A truly messy, awful situation. And this series of betrayals, Governor Keith, Collins, Ralph Felicity, had a significant philosophical impact on Franklin.
How so?
He notes very pointedly that all three men, Keith, Collins, and Ralph, were free thinkers. They were adherents of deism, a philosophy popular then that rejected organized religion and relied on reason and natural morality.
And seeing how these rationalists behaved made him question his own reliance on reason.
Precisely. He looked at their actions, the deceit, the addiction, the irresponsibility, the betrayal, and concluded that maybe this doctrine of deism, while perhaps intellectually appealing, maybe even true in some abstract sense, was not very useful.
Meaning it didn't actually make people behave better.
Exactly. Just knowing what's right and wrong through reason wasn't enough, apparently, to restrain their passions, their vices, their selfishness. This cluster of betrayal seems to have convinced him that pure reason alone, without some kind of external structure, maybe social custom, maybe even religion, was too easily overridden.
Which leads him directly into his next big project.
Imposing that external structure on himself, the famous attempt at moral perfection.
Right, that pivot towards imposing structure is maybe the most famous part of the autobiography. But before we get to the 13 virtues, there's that great little anecdote about him abandoning vegetarianism. It perfectly captures that tension you mentioned.
It's the perfect bridge, isn't it? Because it highlights Franklin's constant use of reason to, well, justify what he already wants to do.
He'd become a vegetarian initially based on principle, right? Following some writer named Tryon.
Yeah, he considered eating fish or meat unprovoked murder. But it also had a convenient side effect. It saved him money on food, half his board, which he then spent on books. And he even felt the lighter diet gave him greater clearness of head. So principle and pragmatism aligned nicely there.
For a while, until the principal met a boat trip to London and some delicious-smelling fried cod.
Exactly. They're sailing, the crew catches cod, they start frying it up right there on deck. It smelt admirably well, he writes. Suddenly, his principle is in a fierce battle with his appetite.
So how does the great rationalist justify ditching his principles for a piece of fish?
He finds the perfect loophole, the ultimate rationalization. While the cod is cooking, he notices that when they gut the big fish, there are smaller fish inside its stomach.
Ah, the fish ate other fish.
Bingo. He thinks for a moment and then declares basically to himself, if you eat one another, I don't see why we mayn't eat you. And just like that, the principle of unprovoked murder goes out the window, and he enjoys a hearty meal of fried cod.
And the way he reflects on this moment is just classic Franklin. So dry, so self-aware.
It really is, that famous, slightly cynical admission. So convenient a thing is it to be a reasonable creature, since it enables one to find or make a reason for everything one has a mind to do.
It just reveals so much about him. His philosophy is often pragmatic first, principled second. Reason is a tool to optimize his life, whether that means justifying lunch or later structuring his behavior for public success.
And that self-awareness, that constant observation of his own flaws and justifications, that's what leads him to embark on maybe his most ambitious, detailed, and, well, ultimately kind of impossible task.
The bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection.
He approached morality like a scientific experiment. He broke it down, identified 13 virtues he thought were essential.
Temperance, silence, order, resolution.
Frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and later, humility.
And he had a system, right?
Yeah.
A weekly focus.
A very specific system. He decided to concentrate on mastering just one virtue each week. He figured he could cycle through all 13 in 13 weeks, meaning 4 complete courses a year. Over time, he believed he could systematically root out all his faults.
Very logical. Very Franklin. And the order mattered, didn't it?
Yeah.
He started with temperance and silence. Why those two first?
It was strategic. He knew the whole project required constant vigilance, self-monitoring. That needed a clear head. So temperance, not eating to dullness, not drinking to elevation, came first to ensure coolness and clearness of head.
Makes sense. But silence is number 2. That seems counterintuitive for someone who became such a great communicator and networker.
He saw it as essential for self-improvement at that stage. He wanted to break his habit of prattling, punning, and joking. He realized that kind of chatter only made him popular with trifling company, and it got in the way of actually learning anything.
So silence wasn't about being antisocial, it was about listening more.
Exactly. Force himself to listen, to gain knowledge from others, rather than just seeking easy laughs or trying to dominate the conversation. It was about intake, not just output.
And he tracked his progress meticulously.
Oh, yeah. He created a little book with a page for each virtue. He drew columns for the days of the week, and every time he slipped up on the virtue of the week, he'd make a little black spot in the relevant box.
His speckled book.
His speckled book, exactly. He started with 12 virtues, but then he added a 13th. Humility.
That wasn't his idea initially, was it?
No, it was prompted by feedback. A Quaker friend took him aside and, very pointedly, told him that people generally thought he was proud. Overbearing and rather insolent in conversation was the feedback.
Ouch. Sounds like that old Socratic debater hadn't quite disappeared.
It seems like it. He was still perhaps enjoying being right a little too much, maybe rubbing people the wrong way. So he added humility to the list, recognizing it was crucial for social harmony and public acceptance.
Did he actually become humble?
Well, he admits he found acquiring the reality of humility incredibly difficult, maybe impossible for him. If he ever felt he'd achieved it, he said, he'd probably be proud of his humility.
Huh. Classic paradox.
So what did he do?
He did what he always did when reality was too difficult. He focused on mastering the appearance of humility. He used it as a sophisticated social tactic.
Back to avoiding dogmatic language.
Exactly. He made it a strict rule for himself. Avoid all direct contradiction. Avoid any positive assertive words like certainly or undoubtedly. Always use those modest qualifiers. I conceive, it appears to me, I should think.
And he found this apparent humility incredibly useful.
Extremely useful. He confesses that this careful, cultivated modesty, developed almost as a political tactic, was hugely successful later in his public life. How so?
Opinions proposed modestly, he found, got a readier reception and less contradiction. If he turned out to be wrong, he suffered less embarrassment. If he was right, he persuaded people more easily without bruising their egos. He believed this habit, more than any great speaking skill, he considered himself a poor orator, was what allowed him to carry his points in public councils.
So the appearance of humility became his key tool for building consensus.
Absolutely crucial. But the whole system, meticulous as it was, had its weak spot. His great nemesis among the virtues.
Order.
Ah, order. Let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. He found this one extremely difficult to acquire.
Why order specifically?
Partly because he wasn't used to it from his youth, and partly, he admits, because he had such a good memory. If things were messy, he could usually still find them, so he didn't immediately feel the inconvenience of disorder the way others might. It didn't bite him hard enough to force the change.
And this is where he brings in that wonderful, incredibly relatable story of the speckled axe. Why do you think that analogy resonates so much?
Because it's his honest confession that sometimes perfection is just too much damn work, and deep down, maybe we prefer the compromise. It's so human.
Remind us of the story.
His neighbor, a blacksmith, is grinding a new axe for a customer. The customer is really picky, wants the entire surface of the axe head to be as bright and polished as the cutting edge. The smith agrees, but only if the customer turns the heavy grinding wheel himself.
Hard labor.
Exhausting labor. The customer keeps grinding, keeps checking the axe, getting wearier and wearier. Finally, he's had enough and says he'll take the axe as it is. But the smith says, "No, turn on, we shall have it bright by and by. As yet, it is only speckled."
And the punchline.
The exhausted customer replies, "But I think I like a speckled axe best."
And that's Franklin giving up on perfect order.
That's his profound surrender to human imperfection. He looked at his little book, saw how many spots kept appearing under order, and basically admitted defeat. He says he was incorrigible with respect to order.
And he concludes maybe he, too, liked the speckled axe best.
Yes. The failure was so consistent, he even started to wonder, half jokingly perhaps, if a benevolent man should allow a few faults in himself to keep his friends in countenance.
Meaning, if he were too perfect, it might make his friends uncomfortable or envious.
Exactly. Maybe the slightly flawed, speckled persona was actually better for navigating public life than some dazzling, unblemished, unattainable perfection. It makes him relatable.
But even if he failed at perfect order, his industry was absolutely rock solid. We see that when he returns from London and starts working for his old boss, Keimer, again.
Right. Keimer was this sort of eccentric, always full of grand schemes, but not great at execution. He hired Franklin back, initially at high wages, because he needed Franklin's skill.
But Franklin quickly figured out Keimer had an ulterior motive.
He did. Keimer's real plan was for Franklin to train up his other, less skilled workers, these raw, cheap hands, as Franklin calls them, guys like Hugh Meredith, Stephen Potts, and this odd but educated guy from Oxford, George Webb.
Once they were trained.
Keimer planned to fire Franklin, keep the newly skilled workers at low wages, and save himself a fortune. Exploitation, basically.
But Franklin was way too smart for that. He saw it coming.
He did, and it prompted him to make plans to leave and set up his own shop, partnering with one of the guys he'd been training, Hugh Meredith, whose father provided some capital.
And their key advantage was their incredible work ethic.
Their industry and frugality became legendary in Philadelphia almost immediately. Their visible commitment was their most valuable asset, their startup capital, really. There's that famous testimonial from Dr. Baird, a local merchant.
What did Baird say?
He apparently told people trying to vouch for the new printers.
For the industry of that, Franklin is superior to anything I ever saw of the kind. I see him still at work when I go home from club, and he's at work again before his neighbors are out of bed. Wow, that kind of visible, relentless diligence that builds trust.
It absolutely secured their character and credit, as Franklin puts it. It convinced people to give them business, extend them credit. It ensured their printing house thrived, while Keimer's, lacking that discipline, eventually collapsed. Industry paid off, literally.
Okay, so that shift from personal improvement to speculative acts to civic improvement, that's where Franklin really cements his legacy, isn't it?
Absolutely. And he uses the exact same toolkit. That methodical approach, the strategic humility, the focus on practical results, it all starts with his club, the Junto.
This wasn't just a social club, right?
No, not at all. The Junto, or the Leather Apron Club, as it was sometimes known, was explicitly a mutual improvement society. He designed it as a disciplined school of philosophy, morality, and politics for young, ambitious tradesmen and artisans like himself.
What did they do?
They met every Friday evening. They had strict rules of order. They'd discuss specific queries on morals, politics, or natural philosophy. They'd read essays members had written. They critiqued each other. It was a powerhouse of networking and collective problem solving.
A think tank for civic action.
Exactly. It became the incubator, the engine for almost all of Franklin's later public projects in Philadelphia.
And the first major project to come out of the Junto, and maybe the most impactful long-term, was the public library.
The Library Company of Philadelphia. It's a huge deal, basically the first successful public lending library in North America.
How did that idea start?
It began modestly. The Junto members realized they all owned a few books, but nobody had many. So they decided to pull their books together in the room where they met, Mr. Grace's room, so everyone could benefit from the collective collection.
But Franklin saw potential for something much bigger.
He did. He wanted to expand this into a proper public subscription library, open to anyone who paid a small fee, but he knew launching it would be politically tricky.
Why? What was the obstacle?
Himself, potentially. He was becoming successful, maybe a bit envied. He knew if he stood up and proposed this grand new scheme, it might attract opposition just because it was his idea. People might resist just to spite him.
So he used that lesson from the Virtue Project, the appearance of humility.
Precisely. He followed his rule. He put himself out of sight. He didn't present it as his project. Instead, he framed it as a proposal coming from a number of friends, from the collective wisdom of the Junto.
Smart. Deflect attention. Focus on the idea itself.
It worked beautifully. By deferring credit, he sidestepped potential political opposition and got people focused on the merits of having access to books.
And the result was transformative for Philadelphia, he argues.
He really believed so.
Okay.
The library company was successfully chartered and became incredibly popular. He claims it made ordinary Philadelphians better instructed and more intelligent than people of the same rank generally are in other countries.
He even suggests it played a role in the revolution later.
He does. He implies that this widespread access to knowledge made the colonists better equipped to understand and defend their rights and privileges when the time came. Knowledge as civic defense. It's a powerful idea.
Franklin seems to have been an absolute master of engineering what you might call civic happiness, focusing on those small, practical improvements.
Yes, the little advantages that occur every day, as he put it. Things that make daily life easier, safer, more pleasant. The fire company is a perfect example.
What was the problem with fires before him?
Chaos, basically. Fires were devastating in colonial cities. The official city watch was often useless, filled with, as he says, ragamuffins who'd rather drink than patrol. When a fire broke out, there was no organized response. Everyone just kind of panicked.
So Franklin brought order to the chaos.
He organized the Union Fire Company in 1736. It was a voluntary association. Members agreed to keep specific equipment ready: leather buckets for water, strong cloth bags for rescuing valuables from burning buildings. They had rules, regular meetings.
And the idea caught on.
Immediately. The model was so effective, so obviously useful, that other neighborhoods quickly copied it, forming their own fire companies based on the Union's articles. Eventually, Philadelphia became renowned for being perhaps the best protected city in the world from fire at that time.
All from a well-organized volunteer effort. Low cost, high return.
Exactly. It's pure Franklin. Identify a practical problem, devise a cooperative, systematic solution.
He used a similar strategy to tackle Philadelphia's terrible streets, didn't he? They were apparently mud pits in wet weather and dust bowls in dry.
Notoriously bad. Getting people to agree to pay taxes for paving and cleaning seemed like an impossible political challenge. People resist new taxes.
So he didn't start with a tax proposal.
No, that would have failed. He started with a demonstration project, a proof of concept. He lived near the main market, which was particularly messy. First, he persuaded his neighbors to pay to have the small section of street right in front of the market paved.
Okay, a small step.
But then, the dirt from the unpaved parts of the street would blow or wash onto the clean pavement. So he came up with the next brilliant small-scale idea. He found a poor, industrious man and arranged for the residents of that paved block to pay this man a tiny sum each, 6 pence per month, per house, just to sweep that pavement clean regularly.
So he created a visible, tangible benefit first. People saw the clean street.
Precisely. They experienced the advantage directly. Then, Franklin wrote and distributed a paper laying out all the benefits: less dirt tracked indoors, better appearance for shops attracting more customers, maybe even improved public health.
And then he pushed for a wider solution.
Yes. By demonstrating the utility so clearly on a small scale, he built public support. People became more willing to submit to a tax for that purpose. He eventually got legislation passed for citywide paving and regular cleaning, funded by a tax. Prove the value first, then ask for the investment. Classic Franklin strategy.
And he applied that same practical, utility-driven logic to his famous inventions, like the Franklin stove and the improved street lamps.
Right. The stove was designed to be much more efficient than open fireplaces, saving fuel and heating rooms better. And the street lamps, he observed that the common globe-shaped lamps used in London quickly got filled with soot and became dim.
So he designed a better lamp.
A square lamp made of 4 flat panes of glass, which were easier to replace if broken. Crucially, it had vents below and a funnel above to create airflow, drawing the smoke out and keeping the glass cleaner, providing more consistent light. Small improvements, big impact on daily life.
And he famously refused to patent the stove.
He did. The governor offered him a patent, which would have made him money, but Franklin turned it down. His reasoning was remarkable. He wrote that since we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours, and this we should do freely and generously.
Wow. A commitment to open source innovation, centuries ahead of his time.
It really was. His focus was always on the aggregate benefit to society, the human felicity produced by these everyday advantages.
Okay, let's talk about maybe his most celebrated piece of political maneuvering. Getting the funding for the Pennsylvania hospital. This wasn't even his idea originally, was it?
No, the idea came from a physician, Dr. Thomas Bond. But Bond was struggling to raise support and money. Franklin, seeing the value of the project, took over the fundraising and political strategy.
And faced resistance from the Pennsylvania Assembly.
Big time, especially from the rural members. They argued a hospital would only benefit the city of Philadelphia, not the whole province, so why should public funds be used? Plus, they were skeptical that the citizens of Philadelphia would even contribute significantly themselves. They were just generally reluctant to spend the money.
Franklin saw their resistance not as a dead end, but as an opportunity. A lever.
Exactly. He drafted the bill for the assembly with an absolutely masterful conditional clause. It was genius political jujitsu.
What did the clause say?
It stated that the provincial government would grant £2,000 for the hospital only if the citizens of Philadelphia first managed to raise £2,000 through their own voluntary donations. Ah, so he played on the assembly's skepticism perfectly. He calculated that the skeptical country members would vote for this bill precisely because they didn't believe the citizens could ever raise that much money. Passing the bill allowed the assembly to look charitable and supportive of the hospital idea without, they thought, actually having to spend a penny of public money.
But the genius was how it motivated the citizens.
It worked both ways, as Franklin put it. It turned the tables completely. Now, the citizens of Philadelphia had a huge incentive to donate. Every pound, every shilling they contributed would effectively be doubled by the government's matching grant. It made their contributions seem twice as valuable.
It weaponized civic pride and self-interest for the public good.
Absolutely. It mobilized the public wonderfully. They quickly raised more than the required 2,000 pounds through donations. The assembly members who had opposed it were trapped. They had voted for the conditional grant, and now they were obligated to pay up.
And Franklin's take on this.
He freely admits in the autobiography that this was a political maneuver, and that he made some use of cunning. But he says it gave him immense pleasure, because the outcome was entirely for the public benefit, the creation of a vital institution. It's perhaps the ultimate example of his pragmatic approach to achieving good ends.
That ability to read human nature, prioritize practical results, sometimes over rigid principles or established authority. We see that again vividly in his dealings with the British military, specifically General Braddock.
Oh, the Braddock episode during the French and Indian War is just tragic and highlights Franklin's pragmatic wisdom versus entrenched arrogance.
What happened?
General Edward Braddock was sent from England with 2 regiments of regular, disciplined British troops. Very confident. Franklin, who was postmaster general for the colonies by then, met with him to help arrange wagons and supplies for Braddock's expedition against the French Fort Duquesne.
Braddock was dismissive of local conditions.
Utterly dismissive. Franklin, knowing the frontier, tried to warn Braddock about the serious danger of marching his army in a long, thin line, nearly 4 miles long, through the dense woods. He warned specifically about the risk of ambush by Native American forces, allies of the French.
What did he say?
He told Braddock the long line could be cut like a thread into several pieces, and the regulars would be helpless against fighters hiding behind trees.
How did Braddock react?
Braddock smiled at my ignorance, Franklin writes. He basically patted Franklin on the head and said something like, "These savages might be scary for your raw colonial militia, but they can't possibly make an impression on the king's disciplined troops." Total arrogance.
And Franklin knew better than to argue further.
He wisely kept silent. He realized Braddock was so convinced of the superiority of European tactics, so contemptuous of the enemy, that further argument was completely pointless. It was a clash between rigid doctrine and practical, on-the-ground reality.
And the result was, predictably, a disaster for Braddock.
A complete catastrophe. Near Fort Duquesne, Braddock's army walked straight into a perfectly executed ambush by a much smaller force of French soldiers and their native allies. The British regulars, trained for open field battles, panicked under fire from unseen enemies in the woods.
The casualties were horrific.
Appalling. Out of 86 British officers, 63 were killed or wounded. About 2/3 of the 1,100 soldiers became casualties. Braddock himself was mortally wounded.
And his famous last words.
After a day of agonizing silence, just before he died, he reportedly muttered, "Who would have thought it?" The ultimate indictment of his own hubris. The army routed in panic, and the defeat tragically proved Franklin's ignored warnings entirely correct.
Franklin, however, had a much more successful, if less dramatic, interaction with a clergyman during his own military campaign later, applying that same practical, incentive-based thinking.
Yes. This is when Franklin was commissioned as a colonel himself, leading Pennsylvania troops to build forts on the frontier near Gnadenhut. After a massacre there, he had a chaplain assigned to his regiment, a Mr. Beatty.
And the chaplain had a problem.
Mr. Beatty complained to Colonel Franklin that the soldiers weren't showing up for daily prayers. Attendance was very poor, which he felt was bad for morale and discipline.
Franklin, the pragmatist, looked for a solution.
He observed the soldiers' behavior. While they skipped prayers, they were extremely punctual and diligent about one thing: lining up for their daily ration of rum. Each soldier got a gill of rum, served morning and evening.
So Franklin saw an opportunity for leverage.
A simple, brilliant solution. He advised the chaplain, Mr. Beatty, to take over the role of dispensing the rum ration himself.
And only serve it after prayers.
Exactly. Serve the rum only immediately following the prayer service. The result: instantaneous and universal attendance. Franklin dryly notes, Never were prayers more generally and more punctually attended.
It's hilarious, but also insightful.
It's the ultimate Franklin anecdote, isn't it? Far preferable, he notes, to punishing soldiers for non-attendance, as was common. Just align the desired behavior, attending prayers, with an existing, powerful incentive, getting rum. Practical psychology in action.
And all these lessons about industry, frugality, using reason wisely, structuring behavior, contributing to public good, he didn't just live them, he actively disseminated them.
Yes, through his most famous publication, Poor Richard's Almanac.
This was hugely popular, right?
Immensely successful. It ran for 25 years, starting in 1732, selling close to 10,000 copies a year, which was enormous for that time. And Franklin explicitly designed it as more than just a calendar with astrological predictions.
It was a teaching tool.
A vehicle for conveying instruction to the common people, as he put it. He filled all the little empty spaces between the calendar days with short, pithy proverbs and sayings.
The famous Poor Richard saying.
Exactly. Things like, early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise, or God helps them that help themselves, or diligence is the mother of good luck. And they overwhelmingly focused on inculcating two core values.
Industry and frugality.
Industry and frugality as the means of procuring wealth and thereby securing virtue. That connection was crucial for him.
Because he believed poverty was actually an impediment to being good.
Absolutely. That's a core Franklin belief, rooted in his own struggles. He has that great line, "It is hard for an empty sack to stand upright." It's difficult to maintain honesty and integrity when you're desperate and in debt.
So for him, economic independence wasn't just about comfort, it was the necessary foundation for a moral life.
Essential. Achieving self-sufficiency through hard work. The sleeping fox catches no poultry. And careful spending, a small leak can sink a great ship, was the practical first step towards being able to afford virtue, towards being a good citizen. Poor Richard was his way of mass marketing that practical path to the American people. #tag V outro. Brief.
So when you step back and look at Franklin's journey through his own eyes in the autobiography, what endures isn't an image of effortless genius, is it? It's this relentless process of self-correction.
Not at all effortless. His enduring legacy is that he transformed his weaknesses, the runaway kid, the friend who made bad choices, the argumentative young man, into strengths by systematically analyzing them, cataloging them as errata.
He showed us, really, that great success is often built on those meticulously documented failures, the speckled axe moments.
Exactly. He distilled his learning into rules, into systems, even if he, like the rest of us, couldn't always follow them perfectly. He left behind this incredibly detailed manual on how to observe, analyze, and try to optimize human behavior, starting with yourself.
He really was the ultimate practical man of his age. He seemed to understand that critical thinking, reason, that's vital.
But application, persuasion, getting things done in the real world, that's everything. We even see this in how he handled scientific debates later in life.
How so?
When a prominent French scientist, the Abbé Nollet, published a whole volume of letters trying to refute Franklin's groundbreaking theories about electricity, Franklin just ignored him.
He didn't engage, didn't defend his work.
Nope. He basically decided it was a waste of time. He wrote that he preferred to spend his energy making new experiments rather than getting bogged down in disputes about those already made. He just kept moving forward, focused on results, not arguments. Let the work speak for itself.
That philosophy, that focus on what truly matters, what's worth your energy, it's perfectly captured in that famous story he told later in life, the story of the whistle.
The whistle. Such a simple story, but it encapsulates so much of his practical wisdom. He told it in a letter to a friend, Madame Briand.
What's the story?
He said that when he was a child, about 7 years old, his friends gave him a pocket full of copper coins. He immediately ran off to a toy shop and saw a whistle. He was so charmed by the sound, he instantly offered the shopkeeper all his money for it.
Paid way too much.
Far too much. He went home whistling happily, delighted with his purchase, until his older brothers and sisters found out how much he'd paid 4 times what it was worth. They laughed at him, pointed out all the other nice things he could have bought with the money. He cried with chagrin, he says. The pleasure of the whistle was destroyed by the realization of his folly.
And that childhood embarrassment stuck with him.
It left a deep impression. He said that memory served as a lifelong caution against overvaluing things. And as he grew older and observed the world, he saw people constantly repeating his childhood mistake on a grand scale.
Giving too much for their whistles.
Exactly. He saw the ambitious person sacrificing time, health, liberty, and virtue for court favor. He saw the miser giving up kindness and friendship for wealth, the person obsessed with pleasure ruining their constitution, the beautiful young woman marrying an ill-natured brute purely for status or money, all of them paying far too much for something superficial.
And the core lesson feels just as relevant today, maybe more so.
Absolutely. Franklin concluded that letter by saying, "Great part of the miseries of mankind are brought upon them by the false estimates they have made of the value of things and by their giving too much for their whistles." It's a timeless warning about understanding true value in life.
It really is. And maybe as a final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. Despite all of Franklin's incredibly detailed systems for self-improvement, his charts, his virtues, his rational analysis, perhaps the most enduring piece of practical advice he ever received came much more simply, much more physically.
You're thinking of the Cotton Mather story.
Exactly. Late in life, Franklin recounts visiting the famous, and by then quite elderly, Boston minister Cotton Mather. As Mather was showing Franklin a shortcut out of his library through a narrow passage, he suddenly called out, "Stoop! Stoop!"
Franklin didn't react quickly enough.
Didn't understand why, kept walking tall, and smacked his head hard on a low ceiling beam. As Franklin was rubbing his sore head, Mather immediately delivered the lesson.
What did he say?
He said, "You are young and have the world before you. Stoop as you go through it and you will miss many hard thumps."
Wow. Stoop as you go through life.
Franklin notes that this advice, literally beaten into his head, often came back to him later, whenever he saw people suffering the consequences of carrying their heads too high, the consequences of pride and arrogance.
So maybe the ultimate self-improvement technique isn't a complex system.
Maybe sometimes it's just remembering to practice the little simple physical modesty. Just
Yeah.
stoop. Something to think about.